Hello, and welcome to part 3 of a 3-part series that I'm putting together on how to build a particulate filter specifically designed and engineered to go between your freeze dryer and your vacuum pump. If you've watched part 1, I explain why you need to have a particular type of a filter that does a particular job. I explain why this kind of a cartridge filter doesn't work. You might want to watch that. And if you want to build one, then you want to watch part 2, where I give you a parts and prefab list of all the parts that you need to get together and the prefabrication, or what you need to do to these parts before we come together and actually begin to assemble it. So with that, I'm Evan Rowell, and this is Critical Thinking about filtration systems. Okay, so let's get started. The first thing I want you to do is I want you to take these 2 metal pieces, these adapters, these vacuum adapters, and I want you to put them in a pot. I want you to fill it with water, and I want you to put it on the stove and get it to boiling. That has nothing to do with sterilization, but it does have everything to do with the physics of what happens to this when it gets hot and how it'll act when you screw this into it. So go ahead and do that. Put both of these, and I'm only putting one because I've already used one, in a pot, fill it with water, and come on back. So pause it here and go do that. Okay, now that you've got that on the stove and set to boil, and incidentally, you don't have to keep it boiling, just as long as you bring that water temperature up to boiling, you can turn it off and it should be fine. Second thing I want you to do is I want you to grab this piece of acrylic, the one that's solid, the one that doesn't have the hole in it, because we're going to glue that into that end cap, okay? You should have it so that it sits down in there quite easily, moves in and out, it's not tight. And you want to have that bevel around that outside edge, okay? I explained why you want that in the video number 2. But the first thing you want to do is you want to take a piece of sandpaper and you want to rough up this surface of this acrylic, okay? The part that's going to go down. It's just, it'll make for better adhesion. Don't have to be a lot, just kind of rough it up a little bit. Then you want to turn it over and do the same thing to the other side, and I'll explain why later, because there is going to be some acrylic put on top of this too. So rough up both sides of that. There, that should be plenty good. Blow it off and you're good. Second thing I want you to do is to remember to take this cap, and I assume that you've already pulled out those injection nibs that are in there, the 4 along the outside edge or that one that's in the middle, and cleaned it out, make sure there's no oil or anything like that or no dust. Then I want you to take this 2-part epoxy. You're going to want to squeeze about half of that into this cap. Okay, there's about half of it. You can wipe that off onto there. Now, I'm going to want to take, one of your chopsticks, piece of stick, popsicle stick, whatever you want, and you're going to want to mix that around in there. So I'm going to mix it for about a minute. I'll be back in a minute. Okay, it's been about a minute. It's well mixed. I've got it completely covering the bottom of that cap. And now what we're going to want to do, let me set this aside here. What we're going to do is we're going to take this and make sure that you've got the beveled edge down. You don't want the beveled edge up. And you want to drop that into there so that it come in contact with that epoxy. Now you'll notice that it'll turn, back and forth really, really easy, which means you're setting it down in there. So press it, set it down in there. Set it aside and leave it alone. Pause the video, then get up to that point and come on back. Okay, now that you've got that end cap completed and it's off, it should begin to set up in about 10 minutes, maybe to a half an hour. It'll be at least that long before we get back to it. The next thing you want to do is you're going to want to glue your PVC male pipe thread adapters to these 2 short pieces of 3/4 inch PVC pipe. Now, if you put the bevel on them, which you should have, around one end of each one, not around the other, you're going to want to cement these onto the end that doesn't have the bevel. In other words, you want the bevel to be free for later on. Now, let's apply some primer. Now, anybody that's worked with this primer before knows that it gets all over the place. So what I do is when I take the primer out, even though it's not dripping, I'll touch it against a paper towel. And that will help me control the primer. Now with this, you're going to want to prime this about maybe 3/4 of an inch. You don't want to go up too far. Okay, there's that one. And this one also. Again, making sure that you're going opposite the end that has the bevel. Okay, and there's that one. This one's got something right on it here I want to scrape off. So, again, dab it onto the paper towel to control the primer. Okay, now with that, then I'm going to want to put some primer in the caps themselves, in the adapters themselves. Take it out, touch the very end of it against that paper towel, and go ahead and put primer in this thing all the way back in. Try not to get any primer against this outside edge. Okay, that's going to be important later on, and I'll show you why. Primer inside of there. Okay. Next thing you're going to want to do now is to apply some adhesive cement. The same thing applies. Don't pull this thing out of there just dripping with cement. You're going to get it all over the place. Okay, touch it against that paper. Now, you're going to want to put the cement inside the adapter. Excuse me. You're going to want to put the cement inside the adapter only. Do not put it on the PVC pipe. Okay? And then when you're doing that, be very careful not to get any on that outside edge. Put the cement all the way back down. Put a fairly liberal amount in there. Once you've done that, then you can take and push it onto the end until it goes all the way down. Now you'll notice there's no cement around this outside edge. Now, normally, if you were setting up a sprinkler system or something else like that, you would want it around this outside edge. But this will be sealed later on when we put the acrylic on this. So that's why you only put the cement inside the adapter, so that when you push this on, this adapter doesn't squeeze a whole bunch down here and get a lot around this outside edge. So you don't want to do that. So that looks really good. So let's go ahead and do the other one. Remember, be very careful. Put your glue on the inside only. Make sure you get a fairly liberal amount inside of there. Take this and push it all the way on. And again, that's a nice clean edge there. But if you look on the inside, you'll see you'll have plenty of squeeze out. And that's why we only put it on the inside of the adapter. Now we set those aside. All right, so go ahead and pause it here. Get up to that point and come on back and we'll move on. All right, the next part of the process is to take that CD case that you've cut that circle around in, and it's just big enough for the end of this tom cap to fit through it, okay? And one of your O-rings, this is the tom cap that you've cut off. You've cut the end of it off that had the screw in, the screw lid on it, because you just want this back in. Now, this piece has the end that you've cut, and it has the factory side. That factory side needs to stay clean. It needs to stay unmarred, unscratched, unmessed with it. It can't have any glue on it or anything else like that. So this is particularly important that you do this correctly. Now you take a piece of your 3 3/4 inch pipe and you inspect these surfaces, this outside surface right here. This one has a little anomaly on it, but that's okay because I'm using this side. This side has a little tiny bit here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sand these down, but you have to be very, very careful. I'm starting with some 220 grit sandpaper, and I'll put this on here, and I'll just move it around a little bit, very, very lightly. It doesn't take a lot. And don't lean down on it, for heaven's sakes. You want this to stay square and you want it to stay smooth. See, that little anomaly that I had on there is already practically completely gone. But make sure you have a flat surface, piece of sandpaper, and you can move this around on it until it is completely smooth. And that is completely smooth. I'm fairly satisfied with that. Just a little bit more. Try not to lean one way or the other. Don't put uneven pressure on it. You want the pressure to be straight down, and that will work to remove any saw marks that you might have on it, and that feels really good. But as a final step, I've got some 800 grit here. This is really fine, and I'll take that and I will move that around on there to kind of polish it up. Turn it sideways. And yes, now that is a nice flat surface. And the reason that you want this flat surface like this is because this is going to be the surface that helps establish your vacuum. If this surface isn't clean and smooth, you can develop leaks in it, and you don't want that. Okay? So, very nice. Okay? This is the end then that we're going to want to stick this end cap into. So what we do first is we take this O-ring and we'll set it on top of this CD case cover right in the middle. And then we'll take and we'll prime this. Now, you can't see it here, but there's a slight bevel here which makes it so that this side is going to be easier to fit in there than this side. And so what I have done to remedy that is I've taken a piece of 220 grit, or not 220 grit, this is 80 grit, and I've put a little bevel on this edge. Not the factory side, not the molded side, not the smooth side, the side that you cut. You want to go along there and you want to put just a little bit of a bevel all the way around that. It doesn't have to be very much. The only reason that you're putting it on there is to make it easy to stick inside there when it comes time to glue it in here in a few minutes. So give me a minute and I will finish with that. Okay, that looks really good. Okay, you can see, well, you can't see it, but there's not very much. All it did was take off that sharp edge, and that's going to make it so that it will fit down inside of there without having to come in from the other side, which you don't want to do. Okay, so now that I put that bevel on there, we can get started. Oh, I need to get this paper towel first. We're going to use the primer and glue. So we want to start with the primer, and we want to do this outside edge here. Go up about maybe an inch. Stay about a half an inch away from this, this smooth side. Okay, you don't want any primer on there. You don't want to do anything that's going to cause a deformity. So I'll take the primer, and oh, see, I dripped a little bit there. And I'm going to go around several times. I'm not going to get close to that outside edge. And you'll actually feel the primer start to dissolve that ABS plastic. Okay, and that's what you want. Now on this piece, this is your smooth edge here. This is the edge that I sanded. I'm going to want to put the primer on the inside, but I'm not going to want to bring it all the way up to this edge. I don't want any primer on this smooth edge here, because like I say, that's the edge that your O-ring is going to sit up against. So I'll prime this back about maybe 1/4 of an inch, and then I will prime about an inch worth. Okay, here you can see it. Stay away from that edge as much as you can. And that's all you need there. Okay, I did get it a little close there, but I didn't get it up over the edge, which is okay. Now, you're going to want to take your glue or your cement, And you're going to want to be fairly liberal with this cement because you do want squeeze out on the inside. You don't want squeeze out along this edge, but along this back edge here, you do want it to squeeze out. So making sure that it's not going to drip on me, I'll take and I'll put it inside of here. Be careful to keep it away from that edge. Now, because like I said before, I want to have squeeze out on this. Make sure it's not dripping. I put it inside of there, and I put, like I say, a very liberal amount of the glue and or the cement and adhesive inside of here. All right, now very quickly, this is important to be quick. Take this, it's already been primed. This is the factory edge. This is the edge that you cut. It's going to go up. Put it down in between your O-ring and this PVC. That PVC is acting as a spacer. Then you're going to want to take this, very carefully push it down. Okay, now when you do that, do not force this sleeve down onto that O-ring. You just don't do it. You want it to just sit right on top of it. You want it to be nice and flat, okay? But do not force it down on top. You don't want to compress that O-ring, in other words, okay? After about a few seconds, we'll go ahead and we will slide that aside. Go ahead and pause the video here and get to that point and then come on back. Okay, it's been about 10 minutes, and there's one more thing now that I want to do with this while we're working on it. This is in there pretty good. It's not going to go anywhere. And you notice this edge here is nice and clean. This O-ring will set on that, and the tom cap will rise just above that O-ring, just the thickness of this CD cover. All right? Now, because we're dealing with a vacuum here, if you'll notice in the back here, I don't know if you can see it, but there is some squeeze out along that tom cap and the inside of this pipe. You actually want to have that completely sealed. So what I do is I will take this, I will put a fairly liberal amount in there. It doesn't matter if you get it all over the place. Well, I mean it does, but inside here. And I want to seal that inside edge, okay? Going to make a nice cap out of that. Okay, there's a nice layer of cement inside of there. Now when I set it up, I'll still set it inside of this. Set it there, and that's good for there. So go ahead and pause here, get to that point, and come on back. Okay, now that that's done, we're going to apply our first piece of PVC into our acrylic plate. Now, this is the acrylic plate that you've made. Now, I'm using wood. I'm reminding you that I'm using wood here because I don't have another piece of this acrylic. I used it all up while I was engineering all of this. So, because this is just demonstration purposes, I went ahead and used a piece of wood in place of the acrylic. But if you'll notice, this piece still fit in there quite nicely without any problem. So you'll take your acrylic, you'll take the short adapter. This is the one that's short. This is the one that was 2 1/4 or that was 2 1/4 inches instead of 3. You'll notice this is the long one. This will go in that other end cap. But anyhow, you'll take this and you'll take this, and we're going to want to seal that into there. Now, the first thing I want you to do, though, is this should still have the paper on it. If you've got your acrylic, you can see right here, this is a scrap piece, but it'll still have the paper on it. Hopefully, that paper is still there. You shouldn't take that paper off. You can see I'm peeling it off here. But you shouldn't take that off until you're completely done with this. So what I want you to do is I want you to take, and I want you to, you do have to take some of that paper off right now, maybe about that much. It doesn't have to be pretty, but you do have to expose enough to be wider than this insert right here, okay? So go ahead and pause it here, take that paper off, right around there. You can do the same thing on the other side. You will need it done on both sides because on this side you'll have that in there, and on this side you'll have that piece right there, and that's what's going to seal it all together. So pause it here and go ahead and take the paper off from this piece of acrylic, okay? Okay, now that you've got the paper taken off of there, we're going ahead and we're going to seal this into there. Now, we're not going to use the PVC cement with this because this is acrylic. And this PVC cement is not designed to stick to acrylic, so we're going to use two-part epoxy. And what we're going to do is take that two-part epoxy and you're going to squeeze out about a dime size of each one and then mix it. This is 10-minute epoxy. I had to check and make sure of that. Equal amounts. You don't need a lot. But I have another piece of my chopstick here, and I'll start to mix that around. Okay, I'll show you right here. There's not very much. You're not going to need much for this, but you are going to have to mix it. Mix it for about a minute. You want this well mixed. Okay, that's been about a minute. Now, while I paused there, I did add some more to it. I didn't have enough. You need a fairly good glob of this. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to take some of this on the end of this stick and I'm going to apply it to the inside of this. It doesn't have to be a lot, but you do need to apply to the inside of this. Okay? And then you're going to want to take some and you're going to want to put it right around that outside edge so that that PVC will seal onto it. Doesn't have to be pretty, and I think you kind of get the idea of what I mean here. A little bit around that on the surface. You want it all the way around though, because if you don't get it all the way around, you're leaving it open for a leak. So make sure that you're rather generous with it. Put a nice ridge on top of that. Okay. Now with that, it's important enough that I do this, that I'm going to put some around this outside edge. And yes, next, if I were to do this again, I would have even put a little bit more. Okay, so now that I've got epoxy around there and around this outside edge, I'll put this in there and I'll twist it a little bit as I push it down. Now notice you got epoxy squeezing out all around here. Avoid the temptation of wiping it and trying to make it look clean and pretty and everything. Leave it as it is. Okay, then you're going to want to take a piece of paper towel and wipe a little bit of that epoxy off of that edge there, just so you don't make a mess. Now, what you're going to want to do is I'm going to have to mix a little bit more of this epoxy, and I'm going to have to be fast because this is beginning to set up already. I should have mixed enough to begin with, but I didn't. So I have time. I have a full 10 minutes, so I'm not worried about it. But I do need to mix a little bit more. I'll mix this for about a minute, and then we'll move on. Okay, it's been about a minute. That's mixed really well. Now, let's take this ring, and you'll notice this ring, most of them will have the information about the sleeve written on the outside of it. That's going to be the good end. That's the end you're going to want to put down here. This, of course, was cut off of a sleeve, and I'm going to want to put a little bit of primer on it, on the inside. Okay. Now, on this edge that's going down, I need to put a nice heavy layer of epoxy right on this edge. Build it up. Don't worry about being pretty. You do this right and you won't have to worry about it. I've got a nice thick layer of epoxy on the edge of this. And again, it's important that you get it all the way around. Don't leave any open spots. Don't leave any thin spots. Okay. Now here, you want to take a little bit of cement, just a hair, not much at all. Dip it down on there, and you want to apply a little bit of cement fairly liberally all around this edge. Okay. Take this, slide it down onto there, slide it down tight, and you're going to notice that that epoxy is squeezing out all over the place. Leave it on for just a second. That cement will grab it. It only takes about 10 seconds. That cement will grab it down tight. But you want to push it so that you've got a tight seal on both sides. Okay? And then one last thing. Take a little bit of your epoxy and put a thick layer of it around this outside edge here on the top, where you can see those two pieces of PVC coming together. Okay, if you do that, you can virtually assure yourself that you're not going to have a leak. And this is important enough that you don't want to have a leak in this. Okay, because if this leaks, well, number one, it's going to be difficult to find out where it's leaking from. And number two, once you do find out where it's leaking from, you'll have to put more epoxy on it. So it's just better if you do it to begin with. So there you have it. Okay, you have this piece epoxied into there. There's a nice layer of epoxy that's squeezing out down around this base. This ring is keeping that thing tight in there. There's epoxy all the way throughout it, and you've got a good seal there. So go ahead, and we're going to pause there. I want you to pause and get to this point, and be sure, if you're not sure about something, you come back before you mix up this epoxy and watch this video. You might want to watch it 2 or 3 times if you're unsure of what's going on. Again, avoid the temptation of running your finger or something, trying to smooth that out. Don't do it. You've got a good seal there. You might just make things worse, and you're going to make a mess out of everything. So with that, pause it here and get to this point. Okay, it's been over an hour. It's been about an hour and a half since I glued this acrylic into the bottom of this cap, so we're good to go as far as drilling a hole in it. And this is where this 1 1/16 inch Forstner bit is so important, because it drills the holes that will allow that PVC pipe to fit inside of there. The center doesn't have to be exact, but I found a way, an easy way to figure out what the center is. I've taken this vented piece that you did in the prefab. I'll lay it on there, and there should be a hole right smack in the middle of that. And so I'll lay that in there, center. I'll use this marker, and there I have my center. And I will drill this right there, and it'll go all the way through the acrylic, and we'll move on from there. Okay? All right, I went over to the drill press, and I drilled out that hole all the way through the Tommy cap, or the end cap, and that adhesive in there had set up plenty well enough to where the acrylic didn't move as I was drilling it out, and you can see that fit in there really, really nice. And this is the longer one, so it's gonna come out a little bit further on this end. So what we're going to do is pretty much the same thing that we did with this one here. I'm going to mix up, only this time I'm going to mix up quite a bit more, because we're going to need a lot more. So I am mixing up, probably about a full teaspoon of each one. And we're going to start mixing this up. I'm going to do this for about a minute, maybe a minute and a half. And so I'll be right back. Okay, that's very well mixed. I've got quite a glob there. And what we're going to do is the same thing as before. You take a generous amount of that, and we're going to put it right on the inside of this unit right here. we're going to want to make sure that it completely coats the inside. We're going to need a little more. I'm going to come in from this side. Make sure that it completely coats that acrylic, because that's the important part. Okay. Okay, again, and like before, we're going to build up around this outside on the top, just maybe 1/8 of an inch back around the top, so that when that PVC pipe fits in there, it's going to seat itself down into a nice thick bed of epoxy that will, in fact, form the seal. Be generous with it. Don't be afraid that you're going to use too much, because you're really not. All right, now that I've got enough built up on there that I know that I'm going to get squeeze out when I put this into it, again, I'm going to put a little bit around this outside edge here. Now this is beginning to set up, so very quickly push this down into there, twisting it a little bit, and by golly, I've got a good seal. Now this one has got enough goop around, or epoxy around the edge. I'm not gonna go ahead and put any glue on it, but I will prime this a little bit, just to soften it up. And there's so much around that inside edge. Now remember, the one that you want down is the edge that represents this outside edge here. Okay? So turn it over, push that epoxy down, push that ring down onto there. And there, oh, there's lots of squeeze out all the way around it. Excellent. Okay? Now, we have a second ring here. This second ring is going to epoxy down. Let me get my paper towels here. We're going to put another ring on top of that one. This one will have primer on it. This one will be primed around this edge. And yes, it's going to have some cement put on it. Okay, around this edge. Fairly generous. You don't have to worry about any edges being clean or anything like that, but you do want a fairly generous amount of cement. Take this one, again, with the correct edge down, push it on there. There we go. Push it all the way down. And there. Now you've got this thing in there, and it's not going anyplace. It's not going to come out. Now you can, if you have, now see, this is already beginning to set up, so there's nothing left of that. But you can go ahead and use cement, if you want, around that top edge. Okay, I'm going to put some cement all around that top edge, just as an added seal to the whole thing. Okay, and there you have it. This thing is in there. It's not going anyplace. It's already solid. Again, don't wipe any of the goop off or the epoxy off around this edge. That edge is just fine. And you can see, just make sure that it has squeeze out all the way around it on both ends, and it does. So we'll set that here and move on to the next part. So go ahead and get it to this point, pause the video, get it to this point, and then we'll move on. All right, now that we've got it that far, here's where we take out a little insurance against this thing leaking at all. And how we're going to do that is we're going to take the other half of this two-part epoxy here, and we're going to squeeze it into what we've got going on so far here. So this squeezes in there very effectively. You get a whole bunch of it down in there. And then again, I've run out of chopsticks, so I've got a little piece of oak here. But I'm going to start to mix that around. Now you've got to be careful. I mean, you got to be quick with this. Push it up against that edge. Okay, as you're mixing it, you want to move it all the way around the system here. I'm going to have to turn this over, and I got a point on that end. Okay, I got a good mix going on here. I'm going to push it all the way around. Push it up against the edge of that PVC, and so that it wants to seal properly against that PVC. Okay. Okay, that's been about a minute. So as you can see, now that epoxy will settle down a little bit, but you can see it's completely layered that inside of there. And now we can move right on to the next step from here. The next step is to take that 2 1/4 inch piece of pipe and your strainer. This piece you should have made in the prefab. It should look just like this, and it should fit right down inside of one of these shoulders or the sleeves. And this does. It fits in there very well. So here's where we put on the first sleeve. What we're going to do is, again, we don't want any squeeze out around this outside edge here when we glue this thing together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my primer, and you don't have to be real, I mean, it doesn't matter if you get primer down inside of there, but just go ahead and prime this outside edge, or this inside edge here. Prime it all the way around. Don't get your cotton or your ball down into the acrylic, because it's still a little bit wet, but you want it that way, and I'll show you why here in a little bit. Okay, now this one, you're going to want primer around this outside edge. Not too far up, only about 1 inch, and I'll show you why. You don't want it so far up that you're going to glue it onto this. Not yet, anyhow. So now I'm going to take my adhesive, and I'm going to put the adhesive in here and only in here. Do not put the adhesive on this, because you don't want squeeze out yet. So with that, I'm going to take and put my adhesive around here. Take a little bit more. Ooh. Okay. You're going to want a nice generous layer of it in there. Don't be afraid. As long as it's not on that outside piece, it's not going to squeeze out where you don't want it. But you do want a nice heavy bunch in there. Now, a plumber, which I've done some plumbing, will tell you that you don't need this much when you're doing plumbing applications, but you got to remember you're dealing with a vacuum here, and that is a whole nother ball game. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, I'm going to set it down there like that. I'm going to take this, I'm going to put it there. Now work quickly. Put this there, put this inside of there, push that down, only as far as it'll go. Don't push that down in the middle, okay? Because you want that pipe to hold this piece here up against the ridge inside of here so that it doesn't move around, okay? So you can leave that there like that, and you're going to want to let that dry. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take, go ahead and take this piece here. Oh, let's see, not that one. I'll take this one here, put that there, and I'm going to want to glue this piece in. Now this piece is the one that has the bevel around it. Okay, this piece didn't have the bevel, as you remember, but you need to put this bevel on here. So, and the bevel in this one's going to go down. And the reason that this one is going to go down is because you want this bevel to go past that ridge and seat up against that acrylic piece that you just put in there. So we're going to go ahead and, well, let's pause it here. Let's pause it here, give you a chance to get this far, and then when you come back, we'll continue on and we'll glue this piece in to here. And then we're actually going to be building up the filter from this point on, okay? So go ahead and pause, and I'll see you here in a minute. Okay, the rest is going to be pretty straightforward. We're just going to be gluing together the different sections. Before I do, you're going to notice how this now comes off of here, okay? And because we use this to push this piece of pipe down in there, it is set down in there perfectly. This is ready to go. So what we're going to do is we're going to set this on here, and we're going to glue on this piece. Normally, don't worry about the squeeze out. As a matter of fact, we're going to want a little bit of squeeze out on this one. Okay. And the inside of this. Okay. And we'll take this, and we're going to want a fairly decent amount on it. Don't worry about getting it down on that edge. This is going to show some squeeze. Make sure you got it all the way around there. Okay. Now, you can even put a little bit in this. Don't need a lot. Just some. Okay. Then, making sure that you take your divider, put it on top of there. Very carefully now. Push this down as far as it'll go. You notice you do have a little squeeze out here. You can even wipe that off if you want to. Okay. And there you have it. Okay, there's the first piece. All right, go ahead and pause here and go ahead and get it that far. This is sealed up inside of there, and it looks really good. Okay, so go ahead and pause, get to this far, and we'll see you here in a minute. All right, now we're going to want to take this piece. Now this is the piece that has the big bevel on it. Okay, and the reason that we wanted that bevel on here is, although we needed that ridge inside of there to properly seat all this together, we want the edge of this piece of pipe to go down all the way and push against that perforated divider inside of there. So you put the big bevel, and that's what's going to go down. So this is easy enough. We're going to go ahead and prime it about an inch up. Don't have to worry about getting primer on that bevel, anything like that. Okay. And then we're going to want to put some inside of here. Nice even coat of primer inside of there. Then we'll take the glue And I'll start by putting the glue on the inside here. And I will put some glue on the outside here. You don't need to get this on the bevel. You're just going to glue it in. Glue it back about 1 inch. Now remember, you want this to seal really, really well, so I'm putting extra glue on it all the way around it. You have to work fast. This glue starts to dry out really quick if you're not. But you do have to make sure that you've got an ample amount all the way around. And then you'll take this. This is the beveled edge. Put it down and push it all the way down. Okay? Now that beveled edge is now seated down against that acrylic, and that acrylic is in there very, very tightly now. Okay? Now, you want to go ahead and put this second sleeve on. You do it exactly the same way. Just put on some primer on this one. And this one. Now you make sure that this isn't the one that you've removed the ridge on. On this one right here, this is the one that doesn't have the ridge on it. So this is the last one to go on. We're just using it as a stool, a pedestal for that. Now, let's see, glue. Whoops, see, starting to get messy here, but you need to have a lot of glue even if it does tend to get a little messy. You've really got to make sure that nothing on this is going to leak. So we put adhesive, a generous amount of adhesive both here and on your sleeve. Okay. And we're just going to push that down onto here. And you can see we're getting a lot of squeeze out there, which is okay. You want that. Okay, so I'm going to have you pause it here, get to this point, and remember, pay close attention. Don't use the sleeve that you've removed the ridge on. That's the last one you put on. That's going to be the one that's open-ended. So with that, pause it, and I'll see you here in a little bit. Okay, now that you've got it to this point, you got the end cap, and you've got 2 of your sleeves on, the dividers in there. Now you want to put this piece in. Okay, this piece also is going to go down just like any other, but you want to be careful now, again, not to get any glue around this end that this O-ring is going to sit on. So I'll start with the primer. And I'll bring that primer up about 1.5 inches. Okay. And then primer here, about the same, all the way down. It doesn't matter. Just completely coat the inside of that with primer, and that'll be good. Now, with the glue, again, you're going to want a generous amount around this outside edge. Okay. Going to want to make sure that the glue's all the way around. Don't leave any dry spots. Dry spot will almost certainly mean that it will leak. Okay. Take this and put a little bit of glue in there. Don't take much on the inside here. Oops. Well, I'm just about done with this can. Take your piece with this edge up, push it on there, push it down all the way. And now you've got your edge on there. This is the edge that will have the O-ring on it. So now the last thing you want to do is, I have another piece of pipe here, so I'm going to use it to set that on. You're going to want to put your sleeve on there that doesn't have the O-ring or your ridge in it. So again, prime it. This one, you only want to prime it down, not quite to where the ridge was. You should be able to tell, you should be able to look in there and see where that ridge was. Go within about a ½ an inch of it. Okay? And prime that up good. Now that that's primed, be careful. Only come within a ½ an inch of this top. Don't come all the way to the top. Okay, there. That's good. Now, you're not going to want to put any cement inside of here, because if you do, this edge will push the cement up and you'll have all kinds of squeeze out along this edge. This piece right here is the only one that you want to put your adhesive on, or your cement. Okay? Come again to only about ½ an inch from that upper lip. That is important. I can't stress that enough. Make sure you go all the way around. You can even put some down on that lip if you want. Okay. And then, like I say, this is important that you get the adhesive all the way around it. And you can put a whole bunch on there if you want, because at this point, you're not going to squeeze it out onto anything that you don't want it to. There's where I put the primer. Put it on top of that. Boy, this one's going to be a pain. But I got it. And that's actually a good sign. I got lots of squeeze out. And go ahead and wipe it off. But the reason that happened was I kind of waited a long time. First off, my blue is beginning to go bad. I'll be throwing this can away. It was beginning to thicken up. And that's what happens when when your cement begins to thicken up. It becomes harder to push those pieces together. But if you'll notice inside of there now, I've got no squeeze out. It's really clean inside of there. And that's what it looks like. And then my O-ring will go in there. And I will have a second O-ring that will go in there. And then here's the piece that I had done before. That goes in there. And now, when that vacuum is applied to this whole thing, it's not going to leak. And because this is free floating, it will push down hard against those two O-rings, and that'll give me a good vacuum. Okay? So with that, also, I did something else here. I made this cradle so that this wouldn't be rolling around in my dry room or my dark room where my freeze dryer is at. Okay, this will sit in there. This end, of course, will go up to the freeze dryer, and my vacuum pump will go onto this end. Okay, so now there is one more thing that we need to do, and that is actually go get that pan that has the adapters in it that are going to go on here. They should be hot. The water should be boiling, and I'll explain what that's all about. So go ahead and pause it here. Go get your pan, bring it out here, and we'll move on. We'll go from there. All right, so now one of the final steps that we're going to do is we're going to put this steel adapter on the end of this. Now it's in boiling water, so I'm going to take it out of here. But first, let me explain what's going on. The reason that I get this hot is when steel or just about anything gets hot, it expands. Now the expansion is going to be imperceptible to the eye, but it will mean that you'll be able to catch a couple more threads on this PVC fitting. Okay, and then when it cools off, it's going to shrink. And when it shrinks, it's going to grab this PVC fitting, it's going to grab it tight. And this PVC fitting, because it's a plastic, against these hot threads will seal themselves and kind of mold themselves malleably to the metal threads inside of here, so that when this finally cools off, and that is good and hot, when it cools off, it grabs those threads and you'll have a leak-proof seal. You don't want to put any pipe compounds on this. You don't want to put any Teflon tape. You don't want to put anything in there, because this plastic against these hot threads are going to be plenty to make sure that you have a leak-proof seal. Okay, so put it on clean, put it on dry. Now that's plenty hot. I'm going to get it on there. I'm going to start it. And it is hot. I'm going to get my crescent wrench and start it. Start it on there. I can barely touch it. But now, let's see, you can see it here. I can feel that thing actually slipping on a little bit tighter and a little easier. It's not skipping and jumping like it would if it was cold. And I'll continue to turn that down. I don't want to turn it down so hard I break it, but I want to turn it down tight enough to where I can just feel the resistance. It doesn't want to go any further. And there it is right there. Okay. And when that cools down, that's going to actually grab this PVC plastic, and you're not going to have any leaks. You're guaranteed of that. Now, there are many that would say, well, it wouldn't leak anyhow. And they might be right. But you know, I like to go the extra mile. That's why I heated this up. And that's why I am now quite certain that there's not going to be any leaks in this thing. I also went down and grabbed that extra vacuum hose and connected it up to this end. Okay, now they say to go ahead and tighten these down only hand tight. Well, that's true. But I still give it, not an eighth of a turn, not a quarter of a turn. I still give it, I'll grab it with these channel locks, and I will give it just a snug. Okay? Snug, that's all. No more than that. You could barely see it move. But I've had these things leak, or the vibration of the freeze dryer cause them to come off. So I always do it a little bit more. And with that, now with this thing on here, I can put this into here. Now, your freeze dryer door has a latch on it that when you turn it an extra half a turn, it cinches things down. We don't have anything here, so we need something to hold it down. And I find that 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 of these clamps on here like this will hold that thing against those rubber seals, and it'll leave it free floating, so that when the vacuum starts to be drawn in here, this seal in here can move away from the clamps and actually seat itself down in further. And the higher the vacuum, the tighter this seal against those O-rings is going to be. All right, it's been a couple of days since I finished this project. This is my example piece. And I was excited. I took it downstairs. I hooked it up between my freeze dryer and my vacuum pump. I turned it on and it leaked. I was a bit dismayed. I didn't know where it could possibly leak, so I searched and I found that where it was leaking was underneath this O-ring that was down in the channel. In other words, there was a, see if I can get something to point with here. The air was coming down, of course, the outside, past the cap that was in there. It was going underneath that O-ring and up the other side, and that's where it was leaking. Now, I was drawing a fairly good vacuum. It got down to about 2,200 millitorrs, but it wouldn't go any more than that. So that meant that I had a leak somewhere, and I let it sit for quite a while, hoping that, you know, it was just being slow. So what I did, and the reason that I don't have the one that we just finished building here a couple days ago, is because it's currently down on the freeze dryer. It's doing a batch. It's doing wonderfully, and it is holding at about 627, 628 millitorrs, and it's doing very, very well. Now, the other thing that I did was that, if you'll remember right, I took 4 bundles of toilet tissue and put it down inside here. Well, take one of those out and loosen the others up so that you've only got 3. It'll still work. It'll still hold the particulate. Anyhow, how you solve this problem was I took and I went down and bought some 100% silicone. This is GE's Window and Door Project's advanced silicone, 100% waterproof and, you know, 10-year mold free. But anyhow, it's just 100% silicone. You don't need a whole bunch of it. And what I did was I took and I laid a layer of this silicone. You can see it dries really well. I laid a layer of this silicone down inside of this channel. What I did was I put a small bead down inside this channel. Now, you don't want to fill the channel up, okay? I'm not going to do that all the way around. But with that bead in there, when you take your O-ring, and this is just a section of O-ring, and you push it down in there, okay, what it does is, you can see here, here's a close-up picture of it, but you can see here where that silicone now has formed a tight seal that will prevent any air from going down and up the other side. After I did that, I would recommend letting it sit for 48 hours. That silicone has to cure completely. And another thing, before you put your O-ring in, make sure you wash it off with some warm soapy water, because when they're manufactured, they have a release agent on it. Sometimes you see that little white powder, and you want to wash that completely off, okay? The reason that I know this works now is that it is downstairs, and it is doing a batch, and it's been holding at about 620 to 630 millitorrs for the last 2 days now. That batch is just about done. But anyhow, that's all you have to do. It doesn't require redoing anything that you've already done. Just go ahead and get yourself some silicone, squeeze a bunch of it in there, put your O-ring down inside of it, and then you can, even after you put your O-ring inside of it, you can take this and push it down, okay, and so that that O-ring sits down as far as it needs to go without coming up. So with that, I'm Evan Rowell, and this is Critical Thinking, an update. So that's it. Now, I've already tested this one. If you watched the first video, which I haven't made yet, I've already tested it. So because you saw the first video, it tested well, okay? So I'm not gonna make testing it part of this video, because I will test it and I will give you the results in the first video. But I needed to make the second one and the third one before I made the first one. That's why it's taken me so long to get these videos out. But with that, this is done. I'm going to go down and hook it up, and then probably tomorrow I will make video number 1. I'll tell you how it went, and With that, I hope that you'll like and share my video channel and hit that notification bell, because I have other videos in the pipeline talking about different drying methods. But be sure that you recommend me to others who might want to know what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And with that, I'm Evan Rowell, and this is Critical Thinking about vacuum filters.